Hi.
Hello. Wasn't sure if we're on. Welcome to the Environmental Film Festival of Australia 2021, and thank you for joining us for tonight's Q&A with the director of the Weather Diaries, Kathy Drayton, and the subject of her documentary, her daughter Imogen Jones, or Lupa J. Before we commence, we can't talk about the damage that we're doing to this land without first acknowledging who this land actually belongs to. We are broadcasting tonight's event on stolen land. Here in Naarm, or Melbourne, I'm standing on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that same respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people who are watching today. This is and always will be Aboriginal land. My name is Flick Ford, and I'm the host of Triple R's film show and podcast, Primal Screen. I'm also a PhD candidate in Screen and Cultural Studies at the University of Melbourne, and I'm secretary of Australia's longest running film society, Melbourne Cinematheque. The Weather Diaries was the opening night film for this festival, which kicked off on Thursday. And it was accompanied by a live stream performance by Lupa J. It is an absolute honour to be joined by the director of the Weather Diaries, Kathy Drayton. Hi, Kathy.
Hi.
And your daughter, Imogen Jones, otherwise known as Lupa J. Hey, Imogen.
Hey.
So tonight's event is going to be streaming across Australia, and we're opening up the discussion to everyone watching. So if you've got a burning question that you'd like to ask Kathy or Imogen, you can just pop it in the chat and I'll make sure that I read it out. So the Weather Diaries, it's a deeply personal account of the shifts that you begin to see in the world around you, specifically what's happening to the fruit bat or the flying fox colonies in Sydney. It's also a record of the shifts that you see in your daughter Imogen as she negotiates this changing world. Now, last year, your documentary won the Documentary Australia Foundation Award at the Sydney Film Festival. Kathy, before we get into a discussion of the Weather Diaries, can you tell us how you first got into filmmaking?
Well, I did the Bachelor of Communications at UTS, and I was majoring in writing, and I wasn't really enjoying that. And then I tried radio, and that wasn't for me. And then I always felt like film was something other people did. And I just kind of felt like, okay, I'll just try this before I leave, because this will be my only chance. And as soon as I started making my first little films, I just became obsessed. And I stayed, and I've mostly ended up as an editor. Like I've made little films here and there, but I've done a lot more editing really than directing. Editing, I feel like, is my craft. Yeah.
That's interesting you say that. A lot of women, editing is actually really dominated by women, which is interesting in the film industry. How did you, so you went from doing it at UTS, but how did you actually even come to making this film? What was the inspiration?
For the Weather Diaries?
Yeah.
I just, when you have, like I see it with a lot of parents, when you have a young child, and you see, their wonder and excitement and all their dreams about their future and what the world really is like, it's excruciating to be aware of this environmental crisis that's just escalating all the time with just not enough being done about it. And so that built up and up over time, and then I did start making a doco, or trying to get a documentary up. I was pitching a documentary about flying foxes because I've just always loved them. They're all over. They're in Melbourne a lot too, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
Yeah. Like when I moved to Sydney, and I was living in Darlinghurst in in the late 80s when the flying foxes started to roost in the Botanic Gardens. I didn't realise that they were roosting there, but we just started seeing them fly over in bigger and bigger and bigger numbers every day. And I just felt like it made the world of Sydney just so special. It made it a really special place. And then, one day I went for a walk and found them in the Botanic Gardens, and I just felt like, that's the site of the colonisation, the first colony in Australia, and here the bats were recolonising the gardens, and I just thought they were kind of incredible. And then their numbers just got bigger and bigger over time. And so when Imogen was a kid, I used to take her there because the zoos were so depressing, You go to the zoo and everything's got a sign saying that, it's threatened because of loss of habitat and they're in their cages. So, I used to take Imogen to the Botanic Gardens to see the flying foxes a lot. And then it got to the point where they decided to evict them. And so at that time I started to work on this documentary to pitch about flying foxes, and then found out that they're pollinators, forest pollinators, and really important to the health of all the forests we've got up and down the east coast of Australia. And it made me start to really see that climate change, it's not just about fossil fuels, it's about our whole attitude to nature. So and they're also, flying foxes are also really threatened by climate change as well. And then Tony Abbott got elected, and at that point I'd also been talking to people about, different producers about making a climate documentary, and the response I kept getting was there's no market for films about climate change. There's no audiences for television. They're a ratings disaster. And in that Tony Abbott climate, nobody wanted to talk about climate change either, even amongst my friends. I'd start to raise, because it was escalating and getting worse and worse, and I'd start to talk about that to my friends and they didn't want to talk about it. So I felt really silenced. And that film funding bodies weren't interested in climate change films either was another kind of huge cultural silencing. And the recipe was you maybe could make one if it kind of really errs on the side of hope. And at this stage, it wasn't a very hopeful time, and I felt like that was really dishonest. And and so to cut a long story short, I just thought, okay, I'm going to make this on my own. I'm going to go to back to UTS, and do it as a doctoral project. And so that's where it really began.
I'm glad you persevered, because I think the Environmental Film Festival is proof that there is an audience for those kind of films, and definitely a deep need for us to talk about those sorts of things. Imogen, sorry to cut you off there, Kathy.
You're right.
Imogen, you're the subject of this documentary, and you provide something of an emotional anchor to the audience to connect with, because it's your face that we see reacting to the different developments that unfold in the documentary. How old were you when filming began, and did you have any hesitation in being involved?
Well, I was there for some of the really early bat filming, which was in 2010 when I was in year 7. I wasn't in the shots, but I went along with Mum to film the bats on multiple occasions. So I kind of was already around for that, and especially when I was 12, around that age, I was still really into wolves and stuff, and I had my own dreams of working towards saving the environment in some capacity. I wanted to be a wildlife photographer actually when I was 12. So I was already really enthusiastic about it. Anyway, and then I think Mum asked to film me when I was 15. Yeah, I would have been 15 going on 16. And I remember saying yes, but then I remember like the early stages of it. Like saying yes, but then not realizing that it would literally mean Mom had to film us like constantly. Sometimes I just sort of the only time I remember it was like going on a trip. Maybe it was like the trip to Singleton, I think it was, and both me and Dad being like, "Do you have to film all the time?" But then I got used to it. I think Mum just had to do it enough until we all got used to it.
Yeah. There's definitely moments where you seem a little bit annoyed about being filmed.
Especially at 12, yeah. No, I think it was just my grumpiness of high school in general at that point.
Oh, honestly, if I had been captured at that age, I would have been a lot grumpier. So I was very impressed with your your patience. Yeah. No, it's really interesting seeing you go through that, and at such a young age as well, to have that captured on film. Kathy,
but I started.
Oh, sorry.
I had started filming with Imogen. Like I learned camera. I learned how to really operate a camera because I was helping Imogen before that with her music videos. Like she just started making music videos, and so before I really started making the film, we started to have an on-camera relationship. But it was one that Imogen was directing. Like Imogen's a really tough director, I have to tell you. And so, that was part of it too. It's like, okay, but, if you agree, this is my film and I have to direct this,
I love it. We're getting a bit of insight into the creative process there.
I think,
yeah. Sorry, go, Imogen.
I was going to say, I think it was like doing the music video stuff made me feel better about being filmed in general.
Yeah.
Like I was getting used to being filmed anyway, yeah.
Yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense because you do seem very confident in front of the camera, and I think that for your age, it's kind of really surprising to see that. So yeah,
right.
For sure.
Probably wasn't initially, but got a lot of practice. Yeah,
absolutely. So Kathy, I feel like some of our audience, they may not be aware of what's happening to the fruit bat colonies in Sydney. Can you provide a bit of context about why you really wanted to tell this story?
Well, it's not just in Sydney, like right up and down the entire east coast of Australia, they're moving more and more into towns. And it's because of deforestation, because of loss of habitat. And so in towns, especially since we've started growing native gardens, we're providing like a year-round food supply, which they now have trouble finding, all the way up and down the coast like they used to, because we've deforested so much, because we're building on flying fox land too, we're taking, and so there's big gaps in their food supply. Like they usually sort of fly from one kind of blossoming species to the next, as well as eat fruit from the trees as well. But they're basically, they live on pollen. They're beautiful animals. And anyway, so they're moving into towns everywhere, and they've just got this terrible history of persecution. Like it was interesting to me, Imogen had her obsession around wolves, and they're really similar. Like they're both creatures from fairy tales and mythologies, Western mythologies, that are associated with evil and darkness and marauding, settled areas, gardens, farmlands, and with these horrible, violent campaigns where they, people just annihilate them. And they're both keystone forest species. And so it was funny. Imogen had the obsession with wolves first, and then slowly I developed my bat one.
Yeah. let's get into those obsessions. So yeah, Imogen, when you're a child, you're captivated by Hayao Miyazaki's animated film Princess Mononoke, and the film, it tells the story of these supernatural guardians of this forest who watch as the world is destroyed by humans. And in the Weather Diaries, your mum Kathy talks about you dressing up as the wolf goddess as a child. And then in your music career, you've adopted the stage name Lupa J, which Lupa is, of course, Latin for she-wolf. I'm just curious, like, what does the iconography of the film and the concept of the wolf goddess offer you in a creative sense? Or put more simply, why are you so drawn to this character?
I think there are a lot of reasons for it. Like, I was really young when I watched it. I was like 6. And like leading up to that, I'd already kind of had multiple intense obsessions about animals. Like I went through a phase of being really obsessed with like eagles at first, or birds generally. And then kangaroos. I made mum make me a kangaroo like tail and pouch.
I really huge one.
Sorry?
It was really huge, and Imogen used to wear it to bed.
Yeah. I've always been an obsessive person, and yeah, I just really liked animals and nature and stuff when I was really little. I think as well, like I've not really ever been the most inherently like feminine kid, and that's something that's developed more as I've gotten older. But yeah, I think it was just sort of striking seeing that film at the time with the character's son as this like pretty like wild androgynous like character, like princess that was so not like a princess like compared to every other film I'd seen at the time. And so I think it was just a mix of like being really swept up in the fantastical natural world thing with all the like animals, because I loved animals, and then sans like fierceness and wildness and stuff. And so naming Lupa, like my project Lupa J, was also kind of at that point when I was like 15 and I was creating the project, it was sort of I'd come out of a period of trying really, really hard to be feminine and to be heteronormative as well, which I've realized is now more a part of it. And when I was like first writing songs and learning how to write songs, it was like I felt like I was reconnecting with myself again and like trying to figure out who I was rather than trying to be what I thought everyone wanted me to be. And because I'd had this like huge long running obsession with that film and that character and stuff. And also because in the few years before making the project, I kind of lost touch with my like passions about like anything, but especially with like the environment and stuff. Like I kind of really like, I was trying to fit in at school and I just like lost touch of like the stuff I really loved. And so I sort of felt like it made sense to me with the project to like kind of, make it like an ode to my love for that character and like reconnecting with this like fierceness and like and whatever with myself. But on that note, I want to say I've actually come out as non-binary recently, and so the female wolf thing is kind of like, well, the female thing is sort of, it feels different for me now, but I think that character, like there just weren't any like androgynous characters in the media when I was that young, so I loved her.
Yeah, it's interesting as well when we're growing up and we're making sense of our gender, of our sexuality, when we're looking for those characters and what characters stand out to us in film. And I think that whole question of wildness as, you know, as sort of heterosexual, you know, as seen as heterosexual girls are told, you know, that idea of, you know, being cis and being presented as this is how you should act, and wildness is not often coupled with that. This idea of the very phrase, I think, she-wolf, taps into something that we often don't allow to exist at the same time.
Exactly.
Wildness and a female identity, at least in this character. which I think is really kind of interesting that you tap into that even while acknowledging, obviously, you identify as non-binary. That mythology is still really interesting to what you're told about your body.
Yeah.
There's something else that I thought was interesting with this film is it's interspersed with all these beautiful sequences of animation work, and they seem to act as a sort of moments of poetic reflection that kind of really pause the narrative and allow us to wander into this sort of different space. And Kathy, I'm curious, who created these animations, and why did you decide to include them?
Well, originally it was footage. I didn't intend to do this when I started the film, but Princess Mononoke was also really influencing me, you know, like the idea really, it came through Imogen from Princess Mononoke. Like for me, when Imogen became obsessed with Princess Mononoke, and when I very first saw it with her, and at the end of the film, the forest just burns to the ground, and the happy ending is that there's grass growing in its place. And to me, that was just devastating. Like I'd been horrified, you know, at night thinking about what's going to happen if climate change keeps going out of control. And basically that scene in Princess Mononoke was like my worst nightmare vision, you know, that really attached to, like the bats are like the Kadamas in Princess Mononoke, you know, the little tree spirit. I don't know if you know Princess Mononoke, but there's the little tree spirits, and that's what bats are. And so I was bringing all those kind of associations to it and watching it with Imogen. And when it finished, I just felt like that's an extinction story. That is the first extinction story I've ever seen, and it's made for children. And, you know, like I'd been wrestling with, you know, how do I, you know, it's really hard for parents now to find a good way to talk to their children, their little children, about you're growing up in this world where there's this enormous growing threat of extinction that might even happen in your lifetime, you know? And and this film just went boom, and there it was. And then when Imogen became obsessed with it, I was wondering all the time, like I knew it was to do with that powerful little girl figure, but I also thought, because Imogen just watched it repeatedly, like just hundreds of times. And I felt like how much of this is about her trying to kind of understand and integrate and find her place in this world that's steering towards extinction. And so the whole film, my film, just all came out of that. And in the beginning, you know, like I was looking at all different things that I could film possibly in the environment. Like I was a little bit anxious, you know, my idea was to make this local film about climate change. And I was a little bit anxious that maybe in the time I was making it, you wouldn't really see, there wouldn't be any visible evidence of climate change. And but anyway, so in the end, I decided to narrow down the options that I'd been filming on the basis of Princess Mononoke. So I decided to concentrate on forests. And so you have the whole tree chambers, which is looking at native, you know, very local gum trees, Parramatta gum trees, growing in a heated environment, and flying foxes, which are tree pollinators, and Imogen. And so when I started editing the film, at that stage it hadn't occurred to me to actually use any imagery from Princess Mononoke, but it just started. I started to play with it, and it just worked its way into the edit, I guess. And so originally, like I was recutting it. I wasn't putting in full kind of Miyazaki uncut scenes. I was I was kind of condensing it and making it say what I needed it to say quickly. But it gets across, you know, part of what it does is it helps get across some big ideas that are much harder to get across just with everyday kind of sequences of everyday events. And anyway, so yeah, I did that, not really thinking about copyright. Well, not at that stage anyway. I just thought I've just got to work out how to put this story together. And but yeah, when it did start getting close to, it was looking like it would get released, and I started writing pleading letters to Miyazaki. And Tom Zabricki came on board as well, and he did too. And we tried through our networks of, you know, contacts to get to Miyazaki. But yeah, Miyazaki, you know, he's a world unto himself. They're his films. And so in the end, I found this other really fantastic animator, Melody Lee, her name is, and she took it on, and she didn't copy what was there. She was really great. She interviewed Imogen and asked Imogen looked at all of her drawings. Yeah, Imogen had done a lot of childhood drawings of Mononoke, so I gave those to Melody, and yeah, Melody really dived into Imogen's world, and then her animations are kind of like a blend of what I'd put in there from the actual film and Melody's translation. And in fact, Melody kind of made some things clearer in the way she animated it than what I could do just taking it straight from the film. Yeah,
that's amazing. And I think it taps into that idea as well. Like you're saying before, a lot of Miyazaki's films actually do deal with serious topics like climate change and the destruction of our world. And we often think of topics like that as adult topics that children don't understand or don't understand the gravity of. But the reality is that as a child growing up, you do pick up on that, especially when you love animals like you do, Imogen, and when you grew up. And, you know, you do start to think, you learn about what's happening to the habitat, what they need to thrive, and you realize, okay, we are killing those environments, and that's going to have an impact. So it's interesting how we often associate animation and kids' films more broadly with not being able to engage with environmental narratives. And they do, but it just comes out in a different way. And I'd really love the addition of the animation in your film, because I think it opens it up a lot, and it becomes almost like dream sequences. So it works really well in that sense. I was going to say, Imogen, you know, I suppose another thread going through the Weather Diaries is your journey into the music industry as a performing artist. We see you doing your violin lessons and getting to open for artists like Sarah Blasko and Grimes. This is an incredibly personal account of your teenage years and early adulthood. And the film premiered last year, so you've had a bit of time, I suppose, since it's come out. Has seeing your journey captured through your mother's eyes changed how you understand that time in your life?
I wouldn't say it's changed how I understand it, but having it so like laid out and like visible for me to just like go and watch in this like linear way is a very like unusual thing, I think. You know what I mean? Yeah, like I guess it's made me like remember things maybe more than I would have, and like remember moments and remember what I was like and the way I talked and the way I like responded to mom and like, you know, and things like that. Like, and that's kind of interesting and special to have. I actually haven't watched the film in a little while now, because I saw it like multiple times last year when it was out, and we were at like a few screenings, but I think it's been a little while now. And so I'm actually like keen to watch it again now that I've had some more like growth occur in my own life. But yeah, I feel like it's sort of interesting for me to look at every time I feel like I've grown up a bit more, and I can look back and reflect, I guess, on it and what I was like.
Yeah, absolutely. And another part that comes into it is the rest of your family. So, Kathy, your parents both worked in the coal industry, and you speak about running away from home at the age of 16. And once Imogen's born, you're kind of able to repair a bit of that disconnect with your parents. It's really apparent that you're a very passionate advocate for protecting our environment and taking action to protect the world that we live in. Now, one of the difficulties that comes up in debates around climate change is not being able to understand the other side of the argument. And a key strategy, I suppose, in educating people about climate change and getting them involved is kind of bridging that divide between what we see as our differences. I wonder, and it seems as though you've been able to make peace with your parents despite some differences. And I wonder, what has that process taught you about how to find common ground and what we can do if we don't see eye to eye?
It's not easy. Yeah, like I think my father, because he was the one that was working in the industry, and he's trained as an engineer, and he's always said things like dismiss the humanities because there's no single correct answer to anything, whereas with science you can figure out the equation and you get the right answer, you get truth. Truth only exists in equations. But the thing that was so frustrating for me with him was, I said, okay, well, climate science is full of equations. Why don't you have a look at them? I'll send you some papers with the, all the physics of global warming. You can have a look at them yourself. And he didn't want to look. My mother she kind of evolved and started to listen more and more. And I think my dad, we had some difficult or, pretty tense conversations, my father and I, about that what a serious issue it was, and that it's and that it is, and that you can't just think about what's good for business today. It's also for the future. It's for our children's potential for livelihoods too. It's not just about how well everyone's business is doing today. But I think Dad has slowly shifted as with the world around him too. I couldn't do it on my own. I would never have been able to convince him on my own. But he started telling me that different engineering societies are thinking seriously about, how to reduce carbon footprints and all of that sort of thing. So he kind of got moved along like that.
Yeah.
I couldn't shift him on my own. It just I understand too, my parents, I was born in Broken Hill, they were a mining family. They both came from mining in Broken Hill. And on my mother's side, it goes back generations of miners. And so, mining, I've been looking at the genealogy of the family lately, and I can really see clearly how mining has pulled them out of poverty, and so I can understand, it makes you understand in the bigger picture. Mining was these people's, not just my family, but lots of people's, it's their lifeline, from just terrible poverty. So, I guess, there's no simple way of talking people who have been saved by an industry like that, or whose lives have become better. There's no simple way to tell them, well, we want to shut it down now.
Yes. And I think having an understanding and a respect for the complexities sometimes, you know, when we try to rush to a solution, sometimes what we're not thinking about is unpacking all of those complexities, because that takes time and it takes effort, and it takes having an open communication with people on the other side of the room, really.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And something else that kind of stood out, like obviously the focus of the film is climate change and the impact that it's having on our environment and its inhabitants. And indeed, of course, that's the focus of the Environmental Film Festival. But this documentary also offers a fascinating study into being a parent. And children and young people are going to inherit a world that's been shaped by the decisions that we're making today. And a common catch cry in recent times by young climate activists like Greta Thunberg is that we have stolen their childhood. And if we don't do anything about climate change, we'll also have stolen their future. Now, as a parent, how do you continue to nurture hope in your child and still remain honest about what's happening?
Well, I think the worst thing is for them, and that's part of the motivation for me making the film too, the worst thing is for them to see you do nothing, to see our whole generation do nothing. Like, you know, yeah, I do think we're stealing their childhood and their future. But, you know, we have to try, if only just to say, you know, like we think it's really important and we care about you and we're doing our best to make this world better and we're trying to get a long way forward. So when, you know, you're at the stage where you can take it over, we've done half the work. But, you know, the people that say, oh, we'll just leave it up to young people, they're much smarter than us, they make my blood boil.
Mine too.
Yeah, I just think, you know, like psychologically, we're doing an enormous damage to our children to not be seen, to putting everything we can into this major threat to all life on Earth. Like, I find it hard to understand why everybody doesn't just feel like I do.
Yeah. At one point in the film, Imogen, you talk about wanting for someone else to fix the climate to fix our problem with climate change. And Kathy's narration enters that point saying, I'm losing faith that they will. And the documentary shows your response to the climate disaster, and it's a very honest portrayal of your concerns and fears about the future of our world. Do you still find yourself worried about the future?
Well, I kind of feel like that while Mum was filming me, it was hard to be worried. Like, I actually wasn't. Like, it wasn't that I wasn't worried, it was just that there was so much else going on in my life. Like with doing my HSC and high school and what I was going to do after high school and trying to succeed with music, it was like way too much to try and dump this existential kind of threat in there as well. Like, but as a kid, as you were sort of talking about before, like, people think that kids don't pick up on this stuff, but I absolutely did. Like, and I didn't mention that when you asked me about why I connected to Princess Mononoke, but it was a huge thing for me. Like in the imaginary games that I played based around that film, it was sort of like, it was based around that film, but it was also just constantly based around like the humans are destroying the earth, and I and whoever else was like playing the game with me have to fight them to save the earth. And I always sort of had this sense from like a really, really young age as a kid, even before I really understood this stuff, that like that the way that humans like live with nature, which is not really living with nature, it's like controlling it and like farming it, and you know, we've bred animals for all these things. We're not living with it anymore. It's like really containing it so we can live better. Like I'm from a really young age, I feel like I've always sense that is not right. And it really intrigued me when I realized that there are like lots of other cultures that are like non-Western that have lived for generations in a really different way with nature. And I was always sort of like, I remember thinking as a really young kid, one day there is going to be some huge catastrophe and we're going to all have to learn to do that. Like, and I was like, I'm going to be really prepared because I'm really interested in this stuff. And it kind of sounds awful, but I remember like being a kid and almost being like excited for the day that we would have to like be forced to like live in harmony with nature again, as opposed to like farming it and living in cities and stuff. Anyway, to answer your question, when I became a teenager and was at the school I was at, all of those thoughts that I had in my head and those ideas and I guess you could call it concerns, like I just couldn't think about them anymore. I think I kind of, as I was saying before, I was trying to fit in initially in early high school. And then coming out of that, I had to deal with a lot of identity stuff and then the HSC. And there was just no longer any room for me to like really think about my future or the Earth's future. And honestly, I think I still feel pretty similar to how I did in the like final scene that I'm interviewed in 2019, I think it was, when the fires were happening. Although I think I was like in a darker headspace about it then because of the fires, because that was like pretty like overwhelming and frightening. I definitely would say I'm worried, but I still, now the thing is COVID, and like the last 2 years, it's just been kind of like coping with that and like trying to find a way, or like even trying to comprehend having a career in music with COVID happening is like very bizarre. And like I've had times where I'm like, can I even do this? But I guess in a way that kind of ties into climate change. And I know there will be more pandemics probably because of climate change and stuff. And so it kind of feels like there's not really time to worry. There's just like constant adapting.
Yeah. I can definitely, that point you made before about almost wanting people to get to the point where they take it seriously. I remember feeling that way about when our entire cities were being engulfed by smoke. And I thought, now we can't deny it. Like, look at what's happening. And there's a certain, I mean, I know that sounds, like you said, a bit sadistic, but it's because you get to the point where people become so complacent and keep saying it's not a problem, or, not being able to see the damage. And hopefully, the greater visibility around those things does raise awareness. So there is a sort of sick silver lining to it in a way in which it does lead hopefully to action around that, or at least awareness around that.
Like
absolutely.
Unfortunately.
Taking accountability, taking responsibility, and knowing that we're part of that, for sure. I've recently become a very keen kayaker, and there's a section of Yarra River near my house where you can paddle past one of the largest fruit bat colonies in Australia. And these are the same bats that once were in Melbourne's Royal Botanic Gardens, and they relocated to Yarra Bend Park in about 2003. And every night you can watch them fly across the sky, and it's a beautiful sight. It's one of the things I love the most about being in Melbourne. Now, in just the last century, fruit bat numbers have gone from millions to less than 350,000. As you said before, Kathy, they've been victims of lost habitats, climate extremes, and of course humans. What are some of the
mass shooting?
Yes.
Well, they're still being shot. You're still allowed to shoot them if you're a fruit grower.
Are you?
Yeah, you're still allowed to shoot them in New South Wales anyway.
I didn't know that. Yeah. What are some of the initiatives or organisations in your research for this documentary that you've that you know of or you've become aware of, and who are working to protect the fruit bats?
Well, all the carers are from Wires, and Humane Society International. I'm really terrible at remembering names, but
That's right. I put you on the spot there.
But yeah, I think it's the Humane Society International. Like they've been really strong for campaigning around bats. There's lots of great ecologists. Like a lot of scientists are writing good papers. You know, like that was my way in, really, like through people that are trying to manage the human bat conflicts by explaining, because people think if, you know, like there's this bat colony just, you know, in our town, and they think that all those bats permanently live there. But bat colonies are like airports, you know, like most of the bats don't stay in those colonies for very long. They're flying up and down the entire eastern coast of Australia, from Melbourne, or, you know, like all the way up to far north Queensland. And they know these bat colonies, and they stop off on the way, and they're going backwards and forwards finding their favourite food or their, who knows, their favourite friends. They don't fly in flocks, they fly in as individuals. And
do they? That's interesting, because one of the things I've noticed is when they'll go over at the same time if you go around just after sunset. But then a few times there's been one bat, it's like they slept in or something, and they're madly flapping across there.
Yeah. Like they tend to all fly in, you know, they go out in streams, you know, like in different directions from a bat camp, and that's because they're all heading for the blossoming trees over that way, or, you know, the fig trees over that way. They're all heading for their favourite big sort of food supplies in the local area. Yeah. So you know, so you can't control bats by just getting rid of a population in one camp. You know, you take them away, and the next day and a week later, they'll all just keep arriving from, you know, on their journeys up and down the coast. And when you annihilate all the bats in a bat camp, like has happened, or people have tried to do that many times, all you're doing is just decimating a fraction of the species. And the next day there'll be, or within a week or so, there'll be just as many bats there again, you know, proportionately of the entire species on the coast, sort of thing.
Yeah. I can see we've got a few questions coming in from some of the viewers with us tonight. Transitions Film Festival, a fantastic film festival, have submitted a question. What has more potential to save the world, movies or music? And who are some inspiring artists in each category? Imogen, do you have any first thoughts on that?
That's a big question. I wouldn't say that any form of art is more powerful than the other, in my opinion. I also don't think, to be honest, art will save the world. Maybe that's really negative of me. I don't know. I just think that it's
honest answer.
And like, I think art can do a lot, and storytelling can do a lot, but not on its own.
How about you, Kathy? How do you feel about that? Do you think there's a more powerful medium of storytelling for this?
I don't think there's any one film or filmmaker or musician that I could point to, but I think between them, you know, they build up a culture and an attitude, and together, you know, they contribute. It's all about creating tipping points. So, you know, just like there's a climate tipping point that can take us to catastrophe that we have no control over, there's also social tipping points, and all these little things that change people's minds, every little action that people do and talk to somebody else about, they build up and build up, and then suddenly, hopefully, our society will flip into a new state where we have a much better relationship with nature and much more respect. Yeah, so that's I can't point to it, but I think all of these things are important. It's all about sustaining a culture of thinking more originally and not just complying with whatever, you know, the generations before us have done, because in our Western society we have, you know, we're destroying the planet. So we've got to think originally, you know.
Yeah, also just something I thought that struck me recently on this topic, I want to say is Michaela Cole, who directed the TV show I May Destroy You, like in her recent speech, something that really hit me is that she said that she thinks transparency in art is one of the most powerful things. And I think that's really true. That's what you've done in this film, Mum, and that's what's really powerful about it. It's just transparency with your anxieties and your emotions. And I think that, yeah, if art can be powerful, it's in that way.
And it's lovely for you to... So continue.
Sorry. Oh, just in terms of like talking about things that are difficult to talk about through art or are scary to talk about. I think. Yeah. Sorry.
Absolutely. No, don't apologise at all. I think it's really interesting that you bring up Michaela Cole, because another part of her acceptance speech was talking about the role of storytelling, and actually she dedicated her award not only to the victims of sexual abuse, which is the focus of her show I May Destroy You, but also to the storytellers. And I think that whatever way you're engaging in this conversation, if it works for you for music, if it works in films, doesn't matter. Everyone's kind of welcome at the table, I think. Yeah. There's another question here. This one's for you, Imogen. So the viewer wants to know, do you have a new Princess Mononoke new movie obsession? Anything that we should be watching?
Movie. I actually don't think I have had anything that's like reached the same level. It's kind of like music has become that for me, like different artists. I still love Princess Mononoke in the same way though. Like I still need to make sure my friends have seen it, sort of thing. Every time I made a friend, I would make them watch it, and I'm still doing it. But yeah, no, I think my obsessions are now very like musician focused.
Yeah. Drawing on that, can you tell us, have you got anything currently in the pipeline, anything that you're working on at the moment?
I put out a track. Is today Saturday? Yeah, I put out a track yesterday. Yeah.
Was it yesterday, did you say?
Yeah.
Congratulations.
Oh, thanks. That's like the third track that I've released from an upcoming LP, like a full-length album that I've written a lot of, that I'm still working on, and will be coming out next year. The track that I released yesterday, I made a DIY music video for, that will be out on Monday. And yeah, there's like another single from this album that's done that I'm also making a video for that will be out like early next year.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
We look forward to that for sure. And Kathy, I know that this documentary is taking quite a few years for you to make.
Yeah.
Are you going to be starting on another film anytime soon, or do you need a little break?
Well, I've got to finish the writing that goes with it very soon. I think about what I might do. Like, I'm still really interested in forests and like what we do now with, like, I'd like to look at when we lose huge tracts of forest like we have, you know, with these fires, how do we treat that land now, you know, like
yes,
because you can't just grow everything back. You can't just help the same things grow back because the climate shifted. Like the same things can't grow there anymore, you know. So just that problem of how to keep regenerating and using forests to try but trying to, like, I don't even know if it's possible, but that's what I'm very interested in. And so I might look around at what people are doing in that area, you know, like how we kind of keep adapting and trying to kind of sustain life in this really pressured, fast changing, climate.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm very much excited to see where you decide to go next. I just want to say thank you for everyone who's joined us for tonight's Q&A with filmmaker Kathy Drayton and her daughter Imogen Jones. Kathy's film The Weather Diaries, which features Imogen, is available to stream on EFFA, effa.org.au, alongside many other remarkable documentaries, animation, short films and features. It's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you both. I'd also like to thank Bank Australia and Darebin City Council, who are EFFA's partner for screening The Weather Diaries. Thanks so much, Kathy and Imogen.
Thanks, Flick.
Yeah.
Thanks, Flipper. Yeah.
And wishing everyone a very happy festival. Good night.